I, Eleanor Vance, stood by the small kitchen window of my apartment. The morning sunlight streamed in, warming the slightly chipped mug of coffee I held between my hands. Outside, the familiar, unremarkable streets of Oak Creek City stretched out. This tiny apartment wasn't much, not compared to the life I once knew, but it was home now. A sanctuary built piece by quiet piece with resilience I didn't know I possessed, fueled by an unwavering love for my son, Leo. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth seep into me, trying to dissolve the tight knot twisting in my stomach. It refused to loosen. Today was the day I had been dreading ever since the embossed invitation arrived. "Mom, I can't get this tie right." Leo's voice, sounding frustrated, echoed from the living room. I turned, a small smile touching my lips despite the anxiety churning inside me. My 8-year-old son stood in front of the hallway mirror, his small fingers fumbling helplessly with the dark red tie draped unevenly around his neck. Setting the mug down on the worn countertop, I walked over and knelt in front of him. My fingers gently smoothed the silky fabric. "Yes, these can be tricky little things," I said, keeping my voice soft and reassuring. "But don't worry, Mom's got you covered." As I expertly looped the fabric into a neat, respectable knot, a sharp pang tightened in my chest, stealing my breath for a second. I knew exactly what today represented. Sophia, David's sister, was getting married. The absolute last place on earth I wanted to be was at that wedding, surrounded by David's family. People who had never once tried to hide their disapproval, who had never truly accepted me into their world. For over 10 long years, I had poured everything I had into my job at the Sunrise Cafe, taking every extra shift Mr. Henderson offered, working holidays, weekends, anything to make ends meet, to build a life for Leo. Endless hours on my feet, the uncertainty of meager tips. Dealing with customers who ranged from kind to inexplicably cruel, it was all part of the daily grind. Yet, I never complained, not out loud anyway. I had to be strong. For Leo. 3 years ago, my carefully constructed world had shattered. The discovery of David's affair hadn't been subtle, he hadn't even tried to hide it toward the end. Sophia. His own sister. It felt like a particularly cruel twist of the knife. "I want a divorce, Eleanor," he had stated, his voice devoid of hesitation, as if discussing the weather. There was no room for argument, no space for the pain that ripped through me. I hadn't cried that day, not where he could see. My 35-year-old self had simply nodded, packed a few essential bags, and moved back into my parents' cramped spare room, taking a bewildered 5-year-old Leo with me. There was no begging, no desperate confrontation. Just a quiet, hollow acceptance. That was my pride, I suppose. My stubborn refusal to break down in front of the man who had broken our vows, broken my heart. But pride was a flimsy shield against the constant, subtle barbs thrown by David's family. His mother, Margaret, a woman whose social standing seemed her only defining trait, had always made her feelings crystal clear. From the moment David introduced me, she saw me as nothing more than an unfortunate mistake in her precious son's life. A waitress, barely out of high school then, who had somehow trapped him, who had no business marrying into their supposedly superior world. Sophia, David's younger sister, armed with her OCSU degree and an air of entitlement, had been no different. She'd never missed a chance to deliver a backhanded compliment or a pointed remark designed to remind me of my place. Leo had noticed it too, long before I wanted him to. He was exceptionally bright for his age, perceptive, sensitive to the currents unspoken between adults. "Grandma Margaret and Aunt Sophia don't like you very much, do they, Mom?" he had asked once. His small face etched with a worry that shouldn't belong to a child. I had forced a smile then, brushing his soft hair back from his forehead, my heart aching. "Adult relationships can be complicated, sweetheart," I'd murmured, knowing it was a weak deflection, not a real answer. Now, as I adjusted the final fold of his tie, making sure it lay perfectly straight against his crisp white shirt, I dragged my thoughts forcefully back to the present. "Focus, Eleanor." "Leo, listen," I began, meeting his serious gaze. "Today is a special day for Aunt Sophia. It's her wedding, so we need to be on our best behavior, extra polite to everyone, okay?" My son studied my face intently, his sharp blue eyes holding an unspoken understanding that belied his years. He knew I didn't want to go. He sensed the tension coiling inside me. He also knew precisely why I had finally, reluctantly, agreed. "But I want to see Dad," he had said softly, almost apologetically, when the invitation first arrived. His voice laced with a longing that tore at me. I had hesitated for days, the thought of facing them all making me physically ill. But eventually, I relented. This wasn't about my pain, my pride, or my resentment. It was about Leo. It had to be. I smoothed the fabric of my own simple navy dress, a sensible choice from a consignment store. Hoping my hands weren't trembling as much as they felt like they were. I had deliberately chosen something understated, something professional yet forgettable, something that wouldn't draw attention. But I had a sinking feeling that no matter how much I tried to fade into the background, today was going to be different. I could feel it deep in my bones, a cold premonition. Before we stepped out of the apartment door and into the uncertain day, I placed my hands gently on Leo's small shoulders. Looking directly into his eyes, my voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. "Leo, no matter what happens today, no matter what anyone says or does, remember this, we are family. You and me. Never, ever forget that." Leo nodded firmly, his trust in me absolute and unwavering. It was a fragile, precious thing I vowed to protect. Together, we left the quiet refuge of our small apartment, stepping out into the Oak Creek morning. Utterly unaware that the hours ahead would irrevocably change both our lives forever. As the taxi pulled up to the imposing entrance of the Waterfront Grand Hotel, I felt my chest physically tighten, my breath catching in my throat. This place screamed money and influence. Massive crystal chandeliers glittered through the towering glass windows, casting intricate patterns on the immaculately polished marble floors within. The sheer, unapologetic extravagance of it all amplified my feeling of being an outsider, an imposter in a world I didn't belong to. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to calm the frantic fluttering in my chest, and turned to Leo beside me. His small hands were fidgeting restlessly in his lap, his eyes wide as he took in the grandeur. "You ready, buddy?" I asked, forcing a brightness into my voice that I didn't feel. Leo nodded, a quick, jerky movement, but I could see the flicker of hesitation, mirroring my own anxiety, in his eyes. Stepping inside, we were enveloped by the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the sweet, heavy fragrance of thousands of fresh roses. The air hummed with the chatter and laughter of elegantly dressed guests already mingling in the vast, opulent reception hall. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved with practiced, silent elegance, weaving through the crowd with trays laden with flutes of bubbling champagne. I took Leo's hand, his small fingers gripping mine tightly, and led him towards the reception table. A young woman in a severe black dress stood behind it, consulting a guest list on a clipboard. "Ms. Vance?" she inquired, her pen hovering over the paper as she scanned the names. She paused for a fraction of a second, her brow furrowing slightly in confusion or perhaps pity. "If you could please wait just one moment." My stomach lurched. I exchanged an uneasy glance with Leo, my grip instinctively tightening on his hand. The receptionist leaned over and whispered something discreetly to another staff member standing nearby. That staff member glanced quickly towards us, a flicker of something unreadable in their expression, nodded curtly, and then disappeared into the throng of guests. Something was definitely wrong. My initial dread intensified. A moment later, the receptionist returned, pasting on a tight, nervous smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Right this way, please, Ms. Vance." I followed her numbly, Leo clinging close to my side, as she led us through the cavernous grand hall. We passed clusters of impeccably dressed guests, their conversations barely pausing, their glances sliding over us as if we were invisible, or worse, insignificant. And then I saw it, our designated table. For a moment, my mind refused to process what I was seeing. It couldn't be right. My breath hitched painfully in my throat. There were no name tags, nothing so overtly crass. Instead, our table, table 23, was tucked away in the furthest corner of the enormous room, almost hidden behind a large potted palm, pressed uncomfortably close to a swinging door marked "Service Staff Only." It was isolated, pushed aside, miles away from the main bridal table where David and Sophia would sit with Margaret and the groom's family. A physical manifestation of our status, unwanted, unimportant, easily ignored. A cold chill snaked down my spine, sharp and debilitating. The humiliation wasn't spelled out on cardstock this time, but it was just as deliberate, just as cruel. It was a calculated act of social banishment. My first, overwhelming instinct was to grab Leo's hand, turn around, and walk straight out of that suffocatingly opulent hall. We didn't belong here. They had gone out of their way to make sure we understood that loud and clear. But then my gaze fell upon my son. Leo was staring at the table's isolated location. Then back towards the warmly lit main tables where other families were laughing and greeting each other. His small hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. His jaw was set stubbornly, his eyes shining with a mixture of confusion and a hurt that cut me deeper than any personal insult could. I swallowed the thick lump forming in my throat, forcing myself to remain calm, to project an aura of normalcy I didn't feel. For Leo. Always for Leo. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out a chair at the undesirable table. "It's okay, sweetheart," I murmured softly, hoping my voice sounded more convincing than I felt. "It's a big room, sometimes seating is just random." Leo didn't respond verbally. He simply slid into the chair beside me, his small body rigid, his expression unreadable, already building walls I couldn't penetrate. The hall continued to fill around us, the noise level rising as more guests arrived, finding their presumably better placed seats. The clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter created a festive atmosphere that felt jarringly disconnected from the cold knot of dread in my own stomach. And then, Margaret arrived. Regal and imposing in a shimmering silver gray gown, pearls gleaming expensively at her neck and ears. She swept through the crowd like royalty surveying her court. Her gaze scanned the room, sharp and assessing. When her eyes finally landed on us, tucked away in our corner, she paused. A barely perceptible smirk, cold and triumphant, tugged at the corner of her perfectly painted lips. She glided over, her expensive perfume preceding her. "Oh, Eleanor." Her voice dripped with feigned surprise, loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. "You actually came." She flicked a glance at Leo. "And little Leo, too. How nice of you to join us." I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply offered a tight, polite smile and a small nod, my insides churning with resentment. Margaret barely acknowledged her grandson, her gaze dismissing him as quickly as it had dismissed me. Before turning away with a swish of silk to greet other, presumably more important, guests arriving nearby. My hands clenched in my lap beneath the table. Then the music swelled, soft strings filling the air. The ceremony began, unfolding in a hazy blur of solemn vows, the exchange of gleaming rings, and polite, scattered applause. Sophia entered, a vision in an extravagant white gown that must have cost more than I earned in 6 months. Her smile was dazzling, almost predatory, as bright as the diamonds sparkling on her neck. I kept my expression carefully neutral, clapping when appropriate, though inside I felt like an alien observer. Watching a play unfold in a world that had long ago ejected me, chewed me up and spat me out. The reception dinner followed swiftly after the ceremony. The tables, including ours in the corner, were adorned with sparkling crystal glasses and heavy, gold-plated cutlery that felt foreign in my hand. Attentive waiters moved gracefully between the tables, refilling water glasses and setting down plates piled high with elaborate, artfully arranged food. Then, the distinct clink-clink-clink of a spoon tapping against a champagne glass cut through the conversational buzz, demanding attention. The room gradually fell silent. Margaret had stood up, a microphone held firmly in her hand, a practiced smile fixed on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth and rich with practiced, upper-crust elegance, resonating through the hall's speaker system. "We all remember Sophia, of course. So accomplished, with her OCSU degree and that certain confidence she always carried. It's wonderful to see her achieving such happiness today." Polite, dutiful applause rippled through the room. Margaret paused, basking in the attention like a flower soaking up the sun, before continuing. "Weddings, as we all know, are such special times," she purred, her eyes flicking briefly, pointedly, towards our corner table. "A time for love, for family, and for inclusivity." My spine stiffened instantly. I knew that tone. I knew what was coming. "Which is why," she continued, her smile widening slightly, "we're so very pleased to have some rather special guests with us tonight." My stomach plummeted. "Here it comes." Margaret gestured vaguely in our direction, though not looking directly at me. "Our dear former family member, Eleanor, is here gracing us with her presence this evening," she announced smoothly. A low murmur rippled through the nearest tables as heads turned discreetly towards our isolated corner. I could feel their curious, pitying, or perhaps even judgmental eyes on me. Eleanor, Margaret went on, her voice adopting a tone of exaggerated sympathy, as many of you are aware, once had such aspirations. Dreams of a different life, I believe. She paused for effect, letting the implication hang in the air. But life, as it does, took a different turn. A few uncomfortable coughs broke the silence. I stared down at my lap, my fingers twisting the cheap napkin into knots. My cheeks burned with shame. Margaret wasn't finished twisting the knife. And now, she continued, her voice laced with a cloying, condescending sweetness that made my skin crawl. She dedicates herself so fully to young Leo and her work at the Sunrise Cafe. She waved a dismissive hand. It just goes to show, doesn't it? Finding contentment in one's own circumstances, understanding one's proper place in the world. That's the true key to happiness, wouldn't you all agree? A wave of nausea washed over me. It wasn't a direct command to serve food, but it was somehow worse. A public pronouncement disguised as wisdom, designed solely to highlight my lowered status, my failed dreams, my improper place afar beneath them. A mixture of stifled, awkward chuckles and sympathetic whispers echoed in the tense room. My entire body felt numb, frozen. I could feel every single pair of eyes on me, waiting for me to crumble, to react, to confirm her assessment. My throat burned with unshed tears and swallowed rage, but no words came. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. From the corner of my eye, I saw David, seated at the main table, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, deliberately looking away. His jaw tight with discomfort. But he did nothing, said nothing, just like always. The room seemed to blur around me, the condescending smiles, the hushed whispers, the weight of their collective judgment pressing down on me, suffocating me. Humiliation washed over me in hot, sickening waves. I wanted desperately to stand up, to grab Leo, to flee this place and never, ever look back. But then, something shifted. Beside me, Leo's chair scraped loudly against the polished marble floor. The harsh sound cut through the strained silence. I whipped my head around just in time to see him standing up, small but resolute. The entire room fell utterly silent. Every eye swung towards the small boy standing defiantly by the corner table. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Leo, my quiet, sensitive 8-year-old son, stepped forward slightly, away from the table. His small frame seemed impossibly brave as he faced the sea of well-dressed, astonished adults. His voice, when he spoke, was unexpectedly steady, clear, and unwavering, carrying easily through the silent hall. "Excuse me," he said politely, but firmly. "I have a present for the bride." The remaining whispers instantly died. The awkward chuckles ceased. Sophia's radiant smile froze on her face, faltering. My breath caught in my throat, a mixture of terror and fierce pride surging through me. I realized with a jolt that Leo wasn't just making a statement. He had a plan. And whatever he was about to do, whatever secret he was about to reveal, would shatter this carefully constructed facade forever. Leo pushed his chair back further, the scraping sound echoing again, unnaturally loud in the sudden, absolute silence. It felt like the slice of a blade through tense fabric. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between fear and awe. As I watched my son walk with purpose toward the low stage where the band had been setting up, his small frame moved with an air of quiet, unshakable determination. His face was set in an expression of concentration that made him look far older than his 8 years. The entire room, which moments before had been filled with murmurs and Margaret's condescending pronouncements at my expense, fell into a stunned, expectant hush. Every single eye followed the small boy as he climbed the few steps onto the stage. Standing barely tall enough to reach the microphone mounted on its stand, he adjusted it slightly downward, his movements precise. He took a visible deep breath, his small shoulders squaring. "Please stop making fun of my mom." His voice, though small, was perfectly steady, amplified just enough by the microphone to carry clearly through the massive, silent hall. The silence deepened, becoming heavy, almost suffocating. My heart pounded erratically in my chest, a wild drumbeat against my ribs. Leo stood there alone, a small figure in a suit that was perhaps a size too big, facing down an entire room of wealthy, influential adults. His hands clenched tightly into fists at his sides. My mom works really, really hard every single day, he continued, his voice gaining strength. It didn't shake, though I saw his fingers twitch almost imperceptibly against the microphone stand. She wakes up at 5 o'clock every morning, even on weekends, just to pack my lunch so I have something good to eat at school. She helps me with my homework every night, even when she's so tired from her job that she can barely keep her eyes open. She stands on her feet all day long at the Sunrise Cafe, smiling at people who are sometimes mean or demanding, just to make sure I have clothes to wear, food to eat, and a roof over our head. Tears pricked hotly at the corners of my eyes, blurring the image of my brave son on the stage. I blinked them back fiercely. She never complains, Leo stated, his voice ringing with conviction. Not ever. Even when people treat her badly, like she doesn't matter. Even when people, like some people here, laugh at her or try to make her feel small. His gaze, startlingly direct, swept across the room. His bright blue eyes, so like his father's but filled now with something fierce and utterly unbreakable, seemed to challenge them all. But nobody, he declared, his voice rising slightly, nobody has the right to treat my mom like this. Nobody. Margaret, recovering from her initial shock, cleared her throat loudly, stepping forward towards the stage with an uneasy, forced chuckle. My, what a passionate little fellow, she cooed, her voice dripping with false, patronizing sweetness. Leo, darling, why don't we leave the grown-up discussions for later? She attempted a conspiratorial smile. Grandma Margaret will buy you some delicious ice cream afterwards. How about chocolate? Or maybe even 2 big scoops? Leo's serious expression didn't flicker. He didn't budge from the microphone. He didn't even look at her. I don't want any ice cream, Grandma Margaret. Margaret's sickly sweet smile faltered, confusion and irritation clouding her features. I want people to stop treating my mom like she's nothing, Leo said, his voice sharp now, cutting through the pretense. Because she's not nothing. She's my everything. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. The atmosphere had shifted palpably from awkwardness to stunned disbelief. Margaret opened her mouth again, likely to dismiss him condescendingly, perhaps to signal for someone to remove him from the stage. But Leo wasn't finished. I wasn't going to say anything today, he admitted, his small fingers tightening their grip on the microphone stand. I was just going to be polite, like Mom told me. But after what you just said, Grandma Margaret, after how you tried to hurt her, I think everyone here deserves to know the truth. I stiffened, my blood running cold. Truth? What truth? The truth. A nervous, questioning ripple spread through the remaining guests. Sophia, seated regally at the head table beside Arthur, suddenly sat bolt upright. Her eyes darted nervously from Leo to David, then to Margaret, then back to Leo, her face paling beneath her makeup. What on earth are you talking about, sweetheart? She asked quickly, forcing a strained, bright smile. This is a wedding. A happy occasion. Let's not spoil it with silly dash. I heard you, Leo interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. His little shoulders were visibly tense now, braced for impact. The room went utterly still once more. Sophia's brittle smile froze, then shattered. David sat rigid in his chair beside her, his knuckles white where his fingers gripped the edge of the pristine white tablecloth. Leo swallowed hard, a small, audible gulp amplified by the microphone, but his eyes, fixed somewhere in the middle distance, didn't waver. 3 days ago, he began, his voice meticulously clear, I went over to your house, Aunt Sophia. Mom asked me to drop off a card she forgot to mail, and it was on my way to my piano lesson. But when I got close to the porch, I saw Dad's car parked down the street. David's face turned ashen. He looked like he might be sick. My own stomach twisted violently, a sickening premonition dawning. The front door was open just a little bit, Leo continued steadily. Maybe you didn't latch it properly. And I heard you talking inside. You and Dad. A visible shudder ran through Sophia. Her hands flew to grip the edge of the tablecloth, her knuckles matching David's. That's ridiculous, Leo, she stammered quickly, her voice high-pitched with panic. You're just a child. You must have misheard something. Kids imagine things dash. No, Leo stated calmly. I didn't mishear. And I have proof. He reached into the inner pocket of his slightly too large suit jacket and pulled something out. My breath caught in a sharp gasp. It was a phone. An older model smartphone. David's old phone. The one David had given Leo for his birthday months ago, after upgrading his own. The blood completely drained from Sophia's face, leaving it a ghastly white. Margaret let out a small, strangled sound. Leo, with surprising calmness, tapped the screen a few times, then held the phone up close to the microphone. For a tense second, there was only silence, then a faint crackle of static. And then came the voices. Clear and undeniable. Arthur must never find out, David. Never. Sophia's voice, sharp and conspiratorial. I've calculated the dates perfectly. He'll think the baby is his. It has to work. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Someone nearby knocked over a water glass with a sharp crash. Another voice joined the first. David's. Lower, hesitant, but complicit. Just be careful, sophomore. If this gets out. Sophia's voice again, laced with smug satisfaction. Don't worry about that. Worry about the wedding. I want to see Eleanor's face. Mom is totally on board, you know. She helped plan the seating. We'll make that waitress and her kid a complete laughingstock in front of everyone. David's voice, resigned. All right, all right. Seeing Eleanor finally put in her place, yeah. That might be worth it. The room erupted into utter chaos. Shouts, gasps, horrified murmurs. A woman near the front screamed softly. Someone else dropped their fork, the clatter echoing loudly in the sudden pandemonium. The whispers weren't whispers anymore, they were frantic, outraged exclamations. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I felt frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the table as the full, devastating weight of the recorded conversation crashed down around me. Sophia and David. An ongoing affair. A pregnancy, deceitfully planned. A cruel, calculated scheme orchestrated with Margaret to humiliate me and Leo publicly. David shot up from his chair, his face contorted with rage and panic. Leo. Turn that damned thing off. Now. But Leo didn't flinch. He simply held the phone steady, letting the recording play out. Just think, Davy, Sophia's voice whispered, dripping with smug delight. Once I'm married to Arthur, everything will be perfect. He'll never suspect the baby isn't his. It'll be too late then. My head snapped up. I looked towards the head table. Arthur, the groom, sat utterly frozen, his face as white as the tablecloth, a mask of shock and disbelief. His hands, resting on the table, trembled violently. Beside him, his father, a stern-looking man I hadn't met, slowly rose to his feet, his face like thunder. Arthur, he said, his voice low but firm, cutting through the surrounding din. We are leaving. Arthur didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on Sophia, who looked like she was about to faint. No, Arthur, please, she choked out, tears starting to stream down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. It's not, please listen. But Arthur was already moving, his actions deliberate, almost robotic. He reached down, slowly pulled the shiny gold wedding band from his finger, and placed it carefully on the table directly in front of Sophia's plate. Then, without another word, without a single backward glance, he turned and walked away from the table, from the wedding, from her. The chaos in the room intensified. The whispers grew louder, morphing into open discussion and condemnation. Margaret stared, aghast, from her disgraced son to her weeping daughter, her face drained of all its usual arrogance. Replaced by a mask of horrified realization. You utter fools, she hissed, her voice trembling with fury and fear. You've ruined everything. David sank back into his chair heavily, running a shaking hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked lost, broken. His gaze flickered towards me, then towards Leo, who was still standing quietly on the stage, phone now lowered. And for the first time in 3 long years, David actually looked ashamed. Leo calmly put the phone back into his jacket pocket. He walked off the stage, not looking at anyone, and came straight back to our isolated table. He slipped his small, warm hand into mine. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion now that the ordeal was over. I didn't want to make a scene, but I couldn't. I couldn't let them hurt you like that. I swallowed the painful lump in my throat, my own tears finally overflowing, and wrapped my arms tightly around my incredibly brave son. Burying my face in his hair. "Oh, Leo," I whispered back, my voice choked. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing at all. You were amazing." Around us, the chaos continued unabated. Sophia was sobbing hysterically now, her shoulders shaking. David sat slumped in his chair, silent and defeated. Margaret was muttering frantically about disgrace and reputation, her eyes darting around wildly. But none of it mattered to me anymore. Not really. I took Leo's hand firmly in mine. "Let's go home," I said quietly, my voice stronger than I expected. Without a single glance back at the wreckage of their lives, at the shambles of the wedding, we walked together out of the grand, glittering hall, leaving the debris of my former life behind us for good. The silence that descended after the recording stopped playing, punctuated only by Sophia's ragged sobs, was deafening. Arthur had stood frozen for a long moment, his face pale and utterly devoid of expression, as if the life force had been suddenly drained from him. He blinked slowly, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides, knuckles white. The remaining guests whispered amongst themselves, their gazes darting nervously between the abandoned groom-to-be and the woman who had stood beside him at the altar only an hour before, promising faithfulness. Sophia remained seated, seemingly stunned into silence for a moment after Arthur's departure. Her lips parted, moving silently, as if searching for words, for an explanation, for any way to rewind time. "Arthur," she finally whispered again to the empty space where he had sat, weakly reaching out a trembling hand. But Arthur was gone. His father's stern words hung in the air. "Is it true?" David muttered, more to himself than anyone else, breaking the spell. His voice was barely audible, rough with disbelief and a dawning horror. But in the dead, expectant silence of the vast hall, it sounded as loud as a condemnation. Sophia shook her head frantically, desperately. "No. No, David, it's... Leo is just a child. He doesn't understand. He must have misunderstood. It was a joke. A stupid, terrible joke. I heard you, Aunt Sophia," Leo's voice, small but clear and unwavering from where he stood beside me now, cut through her frantic denials like a surgeon's scalpel. "I recorded what you said. And what Dad said." The weight of those simple, factual words seemed to physically crush Sophia. Her shoulders slumped in utter defeat, and she buried her face in her hands. Her elaborate hairstyle coming undone as racking sobs shook her entire body. Arthur's father, his expression hard and unforgiving, had already turned to follow his son. His quiet fury was palpable. He didn't need to say another word. Arthur exhaled, a long, shaky breath escaping his lips. His eyes lingered for a final, heart-wrenching moment on Sophia's crumpled form. Then, with slow, deliberate movements that spoke volumes, he had reached for the ring. Sophia lifted her tear-streaked face at that moment, her eyes pleading. "Arthur, please," she choked out, the words barely intelligible through her sobs. "Please, I love you. We can fix this dash." Arthur let out a short, hollow laugh utterly devoid of humor. "Love?" He shook his head slowly, a look of profound disillusionment settling on his features. "You were carrying the child of your former brother-in-law, Sophia." His voice was dangerously quiet now. "And you meticulously planned to lie to me about it, to pass him off as my own, for the rest of our lives." He paused, letting the ugly truth hang between them. "Whatever that was," he finished, his voice flat, "it wasn't love." Sophia lunged forward then, desperately grabbing at his hands, trying to hold on to him. "It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Arthur pulled his hands away sharply, stepping back as if burned. He shook his head again, a final, decisive gesture. He turned, slipped the heavy gold band off his finger, and placed it with deliberate, almost gentle precision on the table, right beside her untouched plate of expensive food. Without uttering another word, he had turned on his heel and walked swiftly away, his back straight, his stride purposeful. He didn't look back. The whispers in the room instantly turned into louder murmurs, shocked gasps, hushed but urgent conversations. The shuffling sound of guests hastily gathering their belongings and rising from their seats filled the air. Arthur's parents led the exodus from the ruined wedding hall, their family friends and other stunned guests following quickly in their wake. Eager to escape the toxic atmosphere, the grand, opulent wedding had imploded in a matter of minutes. The spectacle was well and truly over. David, who had remained slumped in his seat, let out a long, shaky breath and slowly, painfully, pushed himself to his feet. His gaze flickered nervously from the sobbing Sophia to where I stood with Leo, then finally settled on his son. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. There's no point denying it now, he muttered, rubbing his hand tiredly over his face. It's true. All of it. Sophia gasped again, as if his blunt admission was a fresh blow. David. How could you? She shrieked at him through her tears. I just told the truth, Sophia, he snapped back, a flicker of his old weakness replaced by weary resignation. What you wanted me to say doesn't matter anymore. The truth is out. Sophia broke down completely at that, collapsing back into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Margaret, who had stood frozen, watching her carefully orchestrated world crumble around her, suddenly found her voice again, sharp and venomous. You absolute, utter fools, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Her eyes darted wildly around the rapidly emptying room, taking in the disgusted stares and averted gazes of the few guests who remained. Mostly out of morbid curiosity. You have disgraced this family. Utterly disgraced us. Do you have any idea at all, what you've done? David shot her a look filled with years of repressed resentment and newfound bitterness. I learned from the best, mother, he retorted coldly. Margaret actually recoiled, staggering back a step as if physically struck. Her face crumpled. For years, this proud, arrogant woman, my former mother-in-law, had looked down on me, judged me. Treated me as though I were less than dirt beneath her expensive shoes simply because I worked for a living and hadn't come from the right background. But now, she stood amidst the ruins of her own making, the architect of her family's public disgrace. Crushed beneath the weight of judgment from the very same people she had tried so desperately to impress. And me? Eleanor Vance? For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, standing there in that ruined hall, I felt no fear, no intimidation in speaking my mind. I lifted my chin, meeting Margaret's frantic gaze, my voice steady and clear, carrying across the remaining space. You tried very hard to humiliate me today, Margaret, I said, the words calm but cutting. You and Sophia cooked up a nasty little plan to turn me and my son into a joke in front of all these people. But it seems the only people who should be truly ashamed today, I continued, my gaze sweeping from her to David, then to the weeping Sophia. Are you, and your children. Margaret's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her face was a mask of disbelief and fury. I turned my attention to David then. And you, I said, a soft, almost pitying sigh escaping my lips. It wasn't amusement, but a profound sense of release. You left me, David. You threw away our marriage, our family. Because you convinced yourself, or perhaps Margaret convinced you, that I wasn't good enough for your precious family name, for your ambitions. I paused, letting the words sink in. Well, look at you now. Look at what you've chosen. You didn't need me to drag you down. You destroyed everything all by yourself. David flinched but said nothing. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. He had no defense left, no excuses, no one else to blame. I took a deep, cleansing breath, the first truly easy breath I'd taken all day. Then I turned to Leo, gently taking his small hand back into mine. We don't belong here anymore, sweetheart, I said softly, just for him. Leo nodded, his eyes clear and trusting. Together, hand in hand, we turned and walked towards the grand exit, my head held high. The last thing I heard as the heavy doors swung shut behind us was the desolate sound of Sophia's continued sobbing and Margaret's frantic, useless attempts to salvage some shred of dignity from the wreckage. But I didn't look back. Not even once. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was walking towards something brighter, something better, something truly mine. Stepping out of the opulent, suffocating atmosphere of the waterfront Grand Hotel and into the cool, fresh evening air felt like surfacing for breath after being held underwater for too long. The chaos, the betrayal, the calculated humiliation, we left it all behind us, locked away in that gilded cage. As we walked towards the waiting taxi stand, the city lights of Oak Creek beginning to twinkle around us. I squeezed Leo's small hand tightly in mine. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, searching his face in the dim light. Leo nodded, though his expression was thoughtful, older than his 8 years. "Yeah, Mom." He paused, then looked up at me, his blue eyes serious. "Are you okay?" I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I'd been holding captive in my chest for years. A profound sense of release washed over me, unexpected and overwhelming. For the first time since David had uttered those fateful words, "I want a divorce," I felt something startlingly close to freedom. "You know what, Leo?" I said, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "I think I really am." We climbed into the back of a yellow cab, the vinyl seats cool against my skin. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the imposing facade of the Grand Hotel shrinking in the distance, I didn't spare it a single backward glance. That world, David, Sophia, Margaret, the judgment, the pretense, none of it mattered anymore. It was their wreckage, not mine. The weeks that followed the disastrous wedding were nothing short of transformative, like stepping out of a long, dark winter into an unexpected spring. Life shifted, subtly at first, then more profoundly. One busy afternoon at the Sunrise Cafe, as I finished wiping down the last sticky tabletop after the lunch rush, the owner, Mr. Henderson, a fair man in his late 50s with kind eyes, called me into his small, cluttered office. "Eleanor," he began, leaning back in his worn office chair and steepling his fingers. "You've been with the cafe for, what is it now? Over 10 years. I nodded, unsure where this was heading, a familiar flicker of anxiety stirring. "You've worked incredibly hard in that time," he continued, his gaze steady and appraising. "Never complained, always reliable, shown more quiet strength and resilience than just about anyone I've ever employed." I blinked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "I've been thinking it's time for a change," he said. "I want to promote you to deputy manager, Eleanor. Full-time, better pay, more responsibility." My breath caught. My heart felt like it nearly stopped, then started again with a painful thud. "Me?" The word came out as a choked whisper. Mr. Henderson chuckled warmly. "Yes, you, Eleanor. It's long overdue, frankly." Unexpected tears burned hot at the corners of my eyes. I blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall. For so many years, I had felt invisible, overlooked, constantly struggling just to prove my worth, to simply be seen. And now, finally, someone saw me. Someone valued my hard work. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." News of what had transpired at the waterfront grand wedding, the shocking revelation, Arthur's dramatic departure, the public disgrace of the prominent family, spread through Oak Creek like wildfire. People who had once barely acknowledged my existence, customers who had looked right through me, now saw me in a completely different light. Strangers sometimes came into the Sunrise Cafe just to quietly shake my hand or offer a word of support. "Good for you, standing up for yourself like that," one older woman told me earnestly one morning, patting my hand across the counter. "And that boy of yours?" She shook her head in admiration. "He's got more courage and integrity in his little finger than most grown men I know." I would smile, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with validation and everything to do with quiet pride. It wasn't about the sudden recognition, not really. It was about the simple, empowering fact that, for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't allowing anyone else's judgment or malice to define me or diminish my worth. Meanwhile, the lives of those who had tried to humiliate me began to unravel, karma working in its own quiet ways. David's company, Sterling Industries, upon discovering the full extent of the scandal and the resulting damage to the family name associated with his management role, quietly restructured his position. He was demoted, pushed into a dead-end administrative role with significantly less responsibility and pay. His once pristine professional reputation was in tatters. The man who had once flaunted his inherited success and connections now found doors politely closing in his face. The whispers followed him everywhere. Sophia, unable to bear the constant stares, the pitying glances, and the judgmental whispers that followed her around Oak Creek, packed her bags and moved abruptly to another city far away. She gave birth to her child alone. Facing the daunting reality of single motherhood, the very life she had once so cruelly mocked me for, without the support system or financial security she had always taken for granted, her social media accounts went dark. As for Margaret, the once proud matriarch, the self-appointed queen of Oak Creek society, found herself increasingly isolated. The same people who had once eagerly flocked to her lavish parties and sought her favor now avoided her calls and crossed the street to avoid encountering her. The disgrace was too public, too messy. They were unwilling to associate with scandal. She was left alone in her large house, surrounded by expensive things but starved of the social validation she craved. Grappling with the consequences of her own cruelty and her children's folly. One evening, sorting through the mail, I found a letter addressed in Margaret's familiar, elegant, expensive script. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. The message inside was short, almost curt. I was wrong. About everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say I am sorry. I stared at the neatly penned words for a long time, the apology feeling hollow, born more of her own diminished circumstances than genuine remorse. Then, I took a deep breath, folded the letter carefully, and walked over to the kitchen trash can. I tore the letter into small pieces and let them flutter down amongst the coffee grounds and vegetable peelings. I would not forget what they did, but I would no longer carry the weight of their judgment. I didn't need to reply. My peace wouldn't be found in engaging with her again. Months later, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the small, newly minted deputy manager badge pinned neatly to my crisp Sunrise Cafe uniform. A sense of quiet accomplishment warmed me from the inside out. Leo came running into the room just then, waving a paper triumphantly in his hand. "Mom. Look. A+ on my history presentation," he grinned, his eyes sparkling with pride. I beamed, turning to pull him into a fierce hug, inhaling the familiar scent of his shampoo and boyish energy. "That's fantastic, sweetheart. I knew you could do it." I had been humiliated. I had felt broken, discarded, less than nothing. But I hadn't stayed down. Leo and we had risen. Stronger, more resilient, and more connected than ever before. And for the first time in many, many years, looking at my reflection, looking at my wonderful son, I felt genuinely excited about the future. Whatever it might hold. Later that evening, I sat curled up on our comfortable, slightly worn couch, my legs tucked beneath me, watching as Leo spread his schoolbooks across the coffee table. His brow was furrowed in concentration as he meticulously worked through a challenging math problem, the tip of his pencil occasionally migrating to his mouth as he thought. He chewed on it lightly, a habit I kept meaning to discourage. Ever since that tumultuous night at the wedding, something fundamental had shifted within him, a quiet confidence solidifying. At school, he walked a little taller. He spoke up more readily in class discussions. His teachers commented on his sharp mind and his thoughtful contributions. His classmates, recognizing his quiet integrity, listened when he spoke. The boy who had once hesitated, observing silently from the sidelines, now carried himself with an understated but undeniable strength. One afternoon, a few weeks prior, he had burst through the apartment door after school, waving a certificate triumphantly, his face alight with excitement. "Mom. Mom. Guess what? I won the class debate competition today." I had beamed, dropping the potatoes I was peeling and pulling him into a celebratory hug right there in the kitchen. "Oh, Leo. That's absolutely amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." I held him at arm's length, grinning. What was the debate topic? It was about the importance of honesty, he'd said, his blue eyes twinkling with newfound confidence, and why standing up for what's right matters, even when it's hard. My heart swelled with a fierce, almost painful pride. My son wasn't just brave, he possessed a moral compass stronger than many adults I knew. He was becoming a leader in his own quiet way. Meanwhile, my own life had found a new, hopeful direction beyond the walls of the Sunrise Cafe. 3 evenings a week, after finishing my shifts, tired but determined, I attended night classes at the Oak Creek Community College. Sitting in a brightly lit classroom again after nearly 2 decades felt surreal, even intimidating at first. Surrounded by students mostly younger than myself. But I had never felt more focused, more driven. I was finally pursuing the dream I had been forced to abandon all those years ago due to family circumstances and an early marriage, studying to get my nutrition license. The textbooks were challenging, the schedule demanding, but every small step forward felt like reclaiming a lost piece of myself. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, highlighter in hand, flipping through a dense chapter on metabolic pathways, Leo sat across from me, resting his chin thoughtfully on his folded hands, watching me. "Mom," he asked, his voice serious, "do you think maybe you could own your own restaurant someday?" I looked up from my textbook, surprised by the question. My own restaurant? Wow, where did that come from? Yeah, Leo persisted, his eyes bright with earnest belief. You know so much about food now, with your studying and everything. And you're really good at managing things at the cafe, Mr. Henderson told me so. He leaned forward slightly. So, why not? You could make healthy food that tastes amazing. A warm, gentle smile spread across my face, touching my heart. The simple faith in his eyes was more encouraging than any A grade. Yes, Leo, I said softly, reaching across the table to ruffle his already messy hair. Maybe I can. I tapped my textbook. And this? This is the first step. Leo grinned widely, his earlier seriousness replaced by infectious enthusiasm. Okay. Then promise me, when you own the best, healthiest restaurant in the whole city, I get to be your very first customer. Deal? I laughed, a real, unrestrained laugh that felt wonderful. Deal, sweetheart. You've got it. Later that night, long after the homework was done and the textbooks were closed, we curled up together on the couch. A big bowl of air-popped popcorn nestled between us. The television played one of Leo's favorite animated movies, the familiar characters and silly jokes filling the small living room with a comfortable, ordinary peace. I found myself finally, truly relaxing, letting go of the last vestiges of the weight I had carried for so long, the shame, the resentment, the feeling of being a less than. As Leo leaned his sleepy head against my shoulder, his breathing growing slow and even, I ran my fingers gently through his soft brown hair, marveling at him. For so many years, it had felt like the world was actively conspiring against us, that we were constantly swimming against a relentless tide, fighting just to prove our right to exist, our worth. But not anymore. We had faced down public humiliation, devastating betrayal, and deep, soul-crushing heartbreak. But instead of letting it break us, instead of succumbing to bitterness, we had somehow emerged from the wreckage stronger, more resilient, and more fiercely protective of our small, two-person family than ever before. I knew, realistically, that there would still be challenges ahead. Life was rarely straightforward or easy. Financial struggles might persist, unexpected hurdles would undoubtedly arise. But looking towards the future no longer filled me with a sense of dread. Instead, I felt a quiet, steady sense of hope, anchored by my own rediscovered strength and the unwavering love of my son. I glanced down at Leo, now fast asleep against me, his face peaceful and untroubled in the soft glow of the TV screen. Our story wasn't one of loss, I realized with sudden clarity. It wasn't defined by David's betrayal or Margaret's cruelty. Our story was one of resilience. It was a story of courage found in unexpected places. It was a story of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. And it felt, truly, like it was only just beginning.